It hits like a jolt the moment you hear it. A father sitting in limbo for an entire week, waiting for a polygraph that could either clear his name or bury him under suspicion. Every day during that stretch felt painfully slow, the kind of waiting that drains you mentally because you don't know what comes next, and every hour feels heavier than the last. That tension is exactly what he described, an exhausting, suffocating period where he replayed the same questions in his head, wondering how far investigators were willing to go to corner him or push him into a confession he insisted had no basis in reality. Before we go deeper, make sure you hit the subscribe button and turn on your notifications so you don't miss any updates on this story and others that continue to evolve. When the examiners finally reached out, they presented him with the main questions ahead of time. There were 5 of them, each one framing, in different wording, the same accusation. Did he kill the children? Did he help kill them? Did he assist someone else? These weren't broad, open-ended inquiries about circumstances or events. They were direct, blunt, and accusatory. And the phrasing wasn't hypothetical. Each question assumed something devastating, that the children were already dead. That approach alone could rattle any parent. But in his case, it intensified the pressure dramatically. He felt cornered before the test had even begun, as though investigators were already locking onto a narrative and needed him to fit inside it. Alongside those principal questions, the examiners introduced what are commonly called control questions. These were deliberately crafted to have nothing to do with the children, but instead focus on human tendencies, like whether he had ever lost his temper or acted out of frustration. The purpose wasn't to gather information, but to map his physiological baseline, how his body reacted to stress, discomfort, or guilt when answering questions where truthfulness might be mixed. By comparing these reactions with his responses to the primary, emotionally heavy questions, examiners believed they could separate natural nerves from potential deception. For him, the control questions felt almost irrelevant, yet he understood they were part of the process. Still, the contrast between harmless queries and the deeply loaded questions about his children created a kind of emotional whiplash that made the entire experience even more overwhelming. But he didn't stop there. After going through all of it, he pushed for something more, a second test. This time, he wanted it centered not on death but on the disappearance itself, what he knew, what he saw, what he believed happened. More importantly, he wasn't just asking for another round for himself. He wanted everyone connected to the property, the search efforts, or potential evidence to be polygraphed equally. It wasn't about proving his innocence alone. It was about ensuring the investigation didn't begin and end with him. He believed a widening of the testing pool was necessary to bring credibility, fairness, and balance. In his eyes, if the goal was truth, then everyone should be held to the same standard, not just a parent already under the heaviest spotlight. During the initial exam, investigators didn't just run him through a single session. They conducted 3 back-to-back tests, each designed to verify consistency, reduce error, and eliminate the possibility of misreading a one-off physiological reaction. The total time amounted to around 3 hours, leaving him drained, mentally and physically. He described the experience as feeling like he had been stripped down emotionally, every doubt, fear, and thought running through his mind magnified under the machine in the gaze of the examiner. Yet he endured all 3 rounds without stepping away, determined to give investigators everything they needed to move past him and focus on finding answers that mattered. In an effort to meet every legal and technical requirement, and to satisfy the concerns of both the family and the investigators, authorities brought in an examiner from outside the area. This wasn't a routine decision. Flying someone in is expensive and typically only reserved for cases where the stakes are extremely high or the local results risk being questioned. The father saw this as a critical step because it eliminated claims of bias or familiarity between the examiner and local authorities. To him, it felt like the only way to ensure the results would hold weight and couldn't be dismissed as a product of internal influence or strategy. When he finally passed the test, the investigation shifted. It didn't exonerate him in a formal, legal sense, but it pushed detectives to widen their scope. It altered their trajectory, at least temporarily, away from him as a central figure. But what it did not do was erase suspicion entirely. Investigators continued watching him, questioning him, and evaluating his behavior. They kept him within their circle of scrutiny, even if he was no longer at the center of it. The polygraph had changed the momentum, but not the concern. That in-between space, where he was no longer the primary target but not fully cleared, created its own type of pressure, leaving him unsure how investigators truly viewed him. From that point forward, he became more outspoken about broadening the investigation. He urged investigators to test anyone who had set foot on the property, anyone who had participated in search efforts, and anyone who had handled items later considered potential evidence. His belief was simple. If the goal was truth, then transparency and equal procedures were essential. He wanted consistency. He wanted balance. And he wanted to ensure no one slipped through the cracks simply because the spotlight had been fixed on him for so long. Yet, even with his cooperation and insistence on broader testing, investigators chose to hold back the full polygraph results. They released only limited information, citing the need to protect ongoing inquiries. This secrecy created a wave of frustration, not just from the father but from others observing the situation. People wanted clarity, answers, and documented proof of what had truly occurred during the exam. But the more investigators withheld, the more questions arose, fueling speculation and deepening tension. Every delay, every redacted detail, and every withheld page contributed to growing call for transparency, especially from those who felt the case was being handled unevenly or unfairly. In the end, the polygraph didn't solve the case, but it reshaped its direction. It exposed the emotional extremes a father was facing while also highlighting serious concerns about investigative consistency and communication. It left the community and the family standing in a complicated middle ground, where suspicion still lingers, clarity remains elusive, and the call for broader truth-seeking grows louder. What remains undeniable is a father's insistence that the process cannot end with him. And as long as questions remain, pressure will continue building, not only on investigators but on everyone connected to the moments leading up to the disappearance and everything that followed.